Hello everyone, thank you for joining me for another video. I'm your host, Sheena Loves Stories, and today we're going to be doing week 10. Yes, week 10 in the 52 greatest chapters of the Bible. I have my Bible and I have my notebook, my journal. Let me get to the page. So week 10 is the first and second chapter of Job. Job is a tricky chapter. A lot of people have problems with it. I had problems with it. I had to lean on some teachers that I follow online to help me understand a lot of what was in Job. I understood the gist of the story, kind of bigger parts of it, but a lot of these finer points in Job they went over my head a little bit. So I had to get help with that. So I have chapter 1 written here, chapter 2. And then here are my notes and prayer points. So let's open up my Bible. That is not it. There it is. So the whole book of Job has 42 chapters and 1,070 verses. I don't know if you guys can see that. It's a little blurry. I liked starting to put that in my Bible, so I'm just slowly starting to do that. All right, so chapter 1 and 2, if you section up the books of Job, chapter 1 and 2 is the dilemma of Job. So, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was blameless and upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. There were born to him 7 sons and 3 daughters. He possessed 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 female donkeys, and very many servants, so that this man was the greatest of all people of the East. His sons used to go and hold a feast in the house of each one on his day, and they would send and invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when the days of the feast had run their course, Job would send and consecrate them, and he would rise early in the morning and offer burnt offerings, according to the number of them. For Job said, "It may be that my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus Job did continually. And now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. The Lord said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Satan answered the Lord and said, "From going to and fro on the earth, from walking up and down on it." And the Lord said to Satan, "Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, and a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil?" Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him and his house and all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. So there's some interesting things that are going around in this little preamble. I like that word, preamble. As Job was very wealthy, and God allowed Satan to test Job. And I like this. There was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. And then Satan also came among them. Like that's very interesting. So we have Job, who's super wealthy, and God presented Job specifically to Satan and said, "Have you seen my servant Job?" And Job's children sinned and cursed God, and he would always sacrifice for them to try and get, trying to think of how to say that, to do the Levitical type of laws and sacrifice on their behalf, because they were constantly sinning and cursing God. And sons of God are the same words when the Nephilim in Genesis 6. It's the same word. I forget what it is. Ben Elohim. It's the same word when talking about the Nephilim in Genesis. So these are like angels. And Satan actually means adversary. And he can accuse us before God. And that's one of the things was I was watching a video on this, and I think it was John Barnett was talking about that, and he's like, just would be just like us going up against God, and Satan would be there accusing us, bringing out all of our little sins and all of the way we're thinking and the way they're doing. In this one, he is saying that God has protected Job. So that's the only reason why Job follows God, is because God has protected him. But if he were to lose all these things, if he were to lose his stuff, then he would curse God. And so God gives Satan permission to test Job. Now there was a day when his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and there came a messenger to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. While he was yet speaking, there came another and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you. Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell upon the ground and worshipped. And he said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I shall return. The Lord gave and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And in all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. So this whole thing, you have all of these major things happening one after another to take away all the riches from Job, to take away his family, and God lets it happen. I heard an atheist talk about this chapter, and they were talking about how God was evil because he let Job's children be killed. But the way he was talking about it was he was talking about it like Job's children were children. Like, no, they are full-grown adults, and the Lord let Satan kill them. And if you go back, you see, like, yes, they're heavy sinners. They curse God continually. So it makes sense on why God would let that happen, because that's the common thing I hear is, why would God let that happen? Like, they were not great people. Job was. Kind of the whole point of the book. But he takes away all of his wealth, everything, hoping that God will curse him. And he doesn't. He still blesses the Lord. He still goes through and shaves his head, puts himself in sackcloth, and blesses God and tells God is good. And so Satan gets annoyed. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said to Satan, from where have you come? And Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro on the earth, and from walking up and down on it. And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him on the earth, and a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil? He still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, "Skin for skin. All that a man has he will give for his life, but stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face." And the Lord said to Satan, "Behold, he is in your hand. Only spare his life." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord and struck Job with loathsome sores from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. And he took a piece of broken pottery in which to scrape himself while he sat in the ashes. Then his wife said to him, "Do you still hold fast to your integrity? Curse God and die." But he said to her, "You speak as one of the foolish women would speak. Shall we receive good from God, and we shall not receive evil?" In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Now then, Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil and had come upon him. They came each from his own place, and Eliphaz and Temanite, Bildad a Shuhite, and Zophar a Naamathite. They made an appointment together to come and show him sympathy and comfort him. And when they saw him from a distance, they did not recognize him. And they raised their voices and wept, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads towards heaven. And they sat with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and no one spoke a word to him, for they saw that his suffering was really great. Was very great. So after Satan gets annoyed, and they have another grouping of angels with God, which is very fascinating. Very fascinating to think about, because you think of angels and he's gathering there. And same thing that happens in the first one, where he's, "Have you seen my servant Job?" And like Satan hasn't been doing all of this to torment Job, to get him to curse God. And Satan's like, "Well, here he's saying that's because you kept him rich. That's why he doesn't curse you. That's why he follows you. You kept him rich." And then here, after that, God is still, "Have you seen my servant Job?" And Satan's like, "Well, no, don't worry about it. It's because you kept him healthy. Well, all a man has is his health. So take that away and he will curse you." And so God lets him torment Job. And he goes after his skin and everything. He has loathsome sores. And a lot of commentators, a lot of teachers bring up that the Satan didn't touch his wife. And she's just telling him to curse God and die. And they laugh about it. But when you read this, especially reading it closely after Genesis, you'll see how there's a lot of times that the devil works to get to a full couple by the wife. It's a weird thing that I've started to see in the Bible, and then I started to see, especially in the Old Testament. Like, even go back to last week, we had King Ahab, who did right in the eyes of God, except until he married Jezebel. And then once he brought in his wife brought in false gods, and then they turned completely away from God, which caused Elijah to, she calls all the prophets to be killed. Elijah had to go into hiding. We had the servant who hid prophets of the Lord, and then he did his whole show against the prophets of Baal, and then they were all killed because he showed the people the power of God. But going back all the way to the Garden of Eden, you had, for some reason, Eve it doesn't read like she was right by Adam when Satan approached her and said, "Did God really say?" Which started the whole fall of humanity. So a lot of teachers like to bring it up as like, his wife is kind of terrible. She is. Curse God and die. But if you think about, if you have a partner who is a non-believer or who ridicules, how much that just tears down your confidence in things, how much it tears down your belief structures. If you're married to somebody like that, and in constant contact with them, like how that can kind of erode your faith, your belief, or any opinions you may have depending on the type of marriage. Not every marriage is like that, but if you have somebody who is an active like non-believer and goes against what you're saying, like, yeah, curse God and die. It's so kind of crazy, but I thought that was an interesting thing that you can see happen throughout the whole Old Testament. And I'm like, that's very fascinating. The devil doesn't really like kill the wives off or anything when he was killing off like the children and stuff. Well, like, did he keep her there to whisper in her ear to try and get Job to curse God? Or was she closer to her husband Job in that she wasn't like a huge sinner like her children were, so she wasn't killed in it? I don't know, but it's a fascinating thing to realize. And another interesting thing is Satan always comes up to the council of people, too, where the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord. Satan comes up after. So it's a funny thing that my husband and I were talking about when I first read this, of just, was God making a point to the angels? Was he teaching them a lesson? Was this a lesson for them and us? Like, are there parallel lessons but different things being taught? Were these ones who were fallen? Were these ones who were faithful? At what, like, these whole little like 2 sentences. Like, I'm so curious, what's going on there? Was he teaching them something? We don't know, but it's fascinating. Okay, and we learned here, and we also see it a lot in the New Testament, where Satan has the power to send down lightning and tornadoes, so he can control the weather. We see that when we have the supernatural storms in the New Testament with Jesus and with Paul. All of these storms where, like, hardened fishermen who were around the bodies of water that they were floating in, or I don't know what exact, sailing in, where they were in with their boats, having these like supernatural type storms, that people who have been in these for years, maybe their whole lives, been sailing, I think that's the right word, or fishing in these areas, were scared, where they were really scared and they didn't really know what was happened, to where Jesus rebuked the wind, and that freaked out his apostles. Like, you can see that Satan clearly has control of the weather, but you also see that God limits Satan's powers in this. So the devil can only do so much to you. Everything that he can do beyond that. There's a lot of people who are out there saying that this is all the devil doing things to them. And like, no, God limits Satan's powers. Everything that you think he's doing after that is you either letting him, or you just falling into your sin and letting it happen and blaming it on something else. Because we are fallen creatures in a fallen world. And sin is something that we all have to fight against. So the one theme, if you want to pick a theme of the Bible. What else did I put in my notes? Seems to also be a test or proof of God's... What did I write? Gravitas? No? Is that an R? Is that a Q? I think I was in a rush. Seems also to be a test or proof of God's quarters? I feel like wanted to be fancy and use a word that I don't usually use. Garters? No, it's not garters. I think it's a GR or a GV. AT. I don't know what that is. I wrote this, I guess, quickly. It's all squiggly. I don't know. If you guys can figure out what that word is, definitely let me know in the comments. But something over Satan. So fill in that blank. And we need to accept and worship God in good times and bad. Like, this is a huge theme of Job. Job is a faithful servant of God. God let Satan test Job's faith and devotion to him. And Job, after going through all of this, losing all of his wealth, losing his health, does not curse God. And he has his three friends. And I didn't understand when people would talk about his three friends and there's like, oh, they give him terrible advice. Like, no, the advice is good, but it's wrong. The advice is good when it's wrong. They all assumed that Job did bad things, that he was a bad man, and that's why God let bad things happen to him. So when he's rebuking them and saying, no, I didn't do that. I'm not a bad man. This is just happening to me. They're like, no, because God doesn't let anything bad happen to his people. So therefore something bad happened to you. So you are bad. That's what they're saying in a lot of these. And they all focus like on separate things in them going after him. And then he's so beat down that he's just starting to lament and like so far you deserve worse because obviously you're a terrible man if something happened to you, because God doesn't let bad things happen to his people. And that's not right. God lets people go through things. Everything that you're going through in life, good or bad, is because of God. Like, it's either God helping you out or, well, not guess. It's in the overall things, it's because of God, but it's because bad things happen to good people. And God lets that happen for very specific reasons. You may never know the reason, but it's for a reason. There are people out there who are suffering, and that suffering is kind of like a butterfly effect radiating out into the world. And we don't know how that affects other people. That could spur somebody on into practicing medicine or looking into specific research or things. And we see in the New Testament that physical ailments especially can happen, like it happened to Paul, to keep him from getting too prideful. And so it's a weird thing for people. I see it in the what is it? The Word of Faith, was it Word of Faith movement? The Name It and Claim It movement, where they're just talking about if you are a true believer in God, God will never let you get sick and God will always make sure to rain down riches on you. And like, that's not true. Have you read the Bible at all? Like, even without reading the whole Bible, you can see a lot of places in it where that's not true. Even if you don't read the Old Testament and you just read the New Testament, which most of them say to do, it's in there, especially the Gospels. If you just read the Gospels, it's still in there. Like, you will still have bad things happen to you. You will still suffer. And a large part of the New Testament is we are called. Jesus said that we were all going to be persecuted for his name. So this whole God won't let anything bad happen to you is kind of ridiculous. Bad things will happen to you. And some of the bad things that happen to you are because, just like in the Old Testament, Israel turned away from God and bad things happened as a consequence. So it's either they're for specific reasons because God has a glorious plan for everyone and everything, or are you turning away from God? Like that's a big thing that just like, okay, yes, bad things will happen to you. You need to turn to God. All right, my prayer points. Thank you for giving me the good things in my life and the hardships you send to shape me. Because that's how I look at a lot of the hardships. I've had not the toughest life, especially if you were thinking in context of being in America, not the toughest life. But when I talk about my life, especially it sounds weird to say it, but like normal people, they're always just like, I don't know what I would do in those situations. And I'm like, well, I know what I did in these situations because I was in them. This is what I did. But talking to like normies is just, they are really surprised about the type of life that I've had. And they're like, how are you still smiling? Why are you so happy? And before, it was mostly just like I learned to smile, and so I smile a lot. Now I actually am happy. So, like, all right, you want to talk about a book I'm reading? But I see a lot of the hardships. They shaped me into the person I am. And there's a lot of them that I went through because of my own arrogance, my own, I can do this. I don't need anybody's help. And these are my choices. I'm being obstinate right now. And I can see how me being obstinate led to a lot of hard situations. But I still think I thank God for all the good things in my life, and I thank him for all the hardships he put me through to shape me into being the person I am. And I can speak on several different things just because of the hardships I went through. And I think we also need to remember to do that. It's good to thank God for the good things in your life, but it's also good to thank him for shaping you into the person that you need to be. And thank you for putting limits on Satan and protecting me. Because of in my previous before I was a Christian, my previous life, before I was a Christian, I would hear a lot of people like blaming so many things on the devil and all of like making Satan to be out this huge omnipotent being that is the complete opposite of God. Reading the Bible and learning more about God's word, I'm like, oh no, that's not true. Secular life was trying to teach me that Satan was really, really bigger than what he is. Now reading the Bible and everything, I'm just like, oh yeah, no, that's not true. So thank you, God, for putting limits on him and for protecting me from him and just putting on my spiritual armor as laid out in Ephesians 6. That keeps me safe. Another prayer point is pray for loved ones, family, and friends. We often forget to pray for them if they are not in hardships. That's one of the things that I had a hard time with too. Well, just praying for my family in general. Because it took me a long time to understand prayer. And everybody would just say it's a conversation. I'm like, but what does that mean? Now I know what it means, and I'd be one of those people that's saying it's just a conversation with God. I'd be one of those people I felt were unhelpful to me. But praying for people, even when they're not actively in a hardship, or if you don't know they're in a hardship or they're not in a hard time, I put it in my daily prayers as I go through. My daily prayers is I start at me and my family, and then I circle out to my immediate family, and then I circle out to my extended family. My prayers in the morning are like that's my morning commute, by the way. So that's why I'm explaining this. I have some time. But I go to my extended family, and then I go to praying for believers and non-believers in my area. And then I go to praying for political leaders in my area. And then I start that like local, then state, and then federally, and then worldwide. Because we should be praying for our political leader. Wherever you stand on the political spectrum. I don't really stand on the political spectrum at all, but I still pray for them. I pray for everyone to come to God and to fully accept Jesus as their Lord and Savior. And I just start that at me and my husband and our children, and then just go out, my mom and my dad, my brothers and my sisters, and I just continue going out and out and out until I get to work. And the last one I have here is show me the truth in things and open my eyes to see your glory and be watchful of Satan's schemes. I'm always praying to see the truth in things because I want to know the truth in things. I'm very curious. Two, I'm very distrustful of a lot of people and a lot of things. I was raised that way. So I don't believe a lot of people, a lot of things, especially organizations, in any way, shape, or form. I'm like, no, I need proof and I need to do some background before I can take what you're saying at face value. So I do pray for God to open up my eyes to his glory, and especially the wonderful things that he has in the Bible. And so I can see the truth in those things, but I can also see when there's going to be like spirit. I will also pray to see if there's going to be a spiritual attack on me, if the Satan schemes. It can encompass a lot of things. Sometimes I get more focused in my prayers. Sometimes I don't. It gets more general. Kind of depends on how I'm feeling and what I am thinking at the time, which is kind of what's in my brain. And there's some things that come to mind when I'm actively praying that I'm like, oh yeah. So that's something I have as a part of my prayer points. But thank you so much for joining me. That was week 10. Yep, week 10. You can see how far I am. I'm trying to catch up. So week 10, and then the next ones will be in the Psalms, which I am still at, which is a hard time for me. I have a problem with poetry, but we're done with week 10 in Job. And Job is just fantastic anyways. And going into God's response to Job is also amazing. And it gets really sciencey. And when I'm listening or when I'm reading in Genesis, I like to think of a lot of examples that are given in Job because those were scientifically proven. There's scientifically proven things that are actually in our world that are just mentioned by God in Job. So that's fascinating. If you haven't read Job, I definitely recommend it. But thank you guys so much for hanging out with me. I hope you guys have an amazing day, night, afternoon, whatever it is where you are. Don't forget to do all the YouTube things, like, subscribe, all of that, yada, yada, yada. And I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.